What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Don't Give Up the Ship podcast. This is episode 65. And today I'm talking to a listener that reached out and had a really interesting career progression / story and wanted to talk specifically about the accountability process, how it happens. There's an episode, well, it says a Spin the Yarn called Band-Aids on Bullet Holes that I recommend going and checking out. And it's me talking about the accountability process and how when it happens, sometimes it's not kept within the confines of just the accountability process, where a sailor is held accountable for an infraction and then allowed to effectively start fresh day one following whatever that disciplinary action is and the punishment, if any, that's awarded, et cetera, right? It could be EMI, it could be all kinds of things. But once that happens, that's it. You've paid your penance, that the things are in place. Maybe you got demoted. Maybe you're paying some money to the Navy or getting some docked from your paycheck, or maybe you're on restriction or whatever that is. You then should be able to move on with a clean slate. And a really great example of that, if you didn't see it, was the post I shared on Facebook from Command Master Chief Jay Bell, who I hope to have on the podcast someday, as I have time and can reach out to him, and hopefully he's willing to do it. But where a sailor was on wearing a restriction badge with a NAM right next to it, because while that sailor was on restriction, he performed at the level that merited a NAM, and the command actually did that and reinforced that behavior positively, which I thought was incredible. It's amazing. It's unfortunate that that's rare, but it's incredible to see, and I was really glad to see it on social media as well, so other people could see it. So we talked about a lot of those things, including the very interesting career progression that this guy had. So check it out. Awesome. All right. So yeah, like we talked about, man, just because we're going to talk a lot about your background kind of is the topic. So just a real quick summary of your background and experience in the Navy that got you to where you're at now. And then we'll get into it.
All right, sure. So my name's Zach Marvain. I'm a Ensign 6130 LDO, United States Navy, Surface Engineering and Repair. Joined the Navy in October of 2007 under a contract as a submarine nuke machinist mate. Went through nuclear power A school, machinist mate in Charleston, went through nuclear power school in Charleston, and then went up to Ballston Spa, New York to finish out prototype. While I was at prototype, I was selected to be a engineering lab tech, SMAG if you're a submariner. And while I was in ELTC school, I'd gotten verbal. I didn't have hard copy orders yet, but I had been selected to be a staff pickup instructor of ELT school up there. Lo and behold, about halfway, maybe 3/4 of the way through ELT school, I came into work one morning about 3/4 still drunk from the night before. And there was another student in the class who, through a circumstance, was behind on some coursework. So I helped him out with some coursework. I ended up taking a quiz for him, and one of the instructors sat down next to me, looked at me and said, "Hey, that's not your name." I looked him square in the face and was like, "You're right. Where do we go from here?" I'm not going to lie about it. I'm not going to try and pass the buck on it, but what's next? So got marched down. Young MM3, had a very stern talking to from senior chief. Did not attend my own disciplinary review board or XOI, but 9 days later went directly to captain's mast. So
that's interesting.
The CO awarded me reduction in rate from E4 to E3, administrative removal from the nuclear field, and forfeiture of $500 a month times 2, which back in the 09 time frame was, I believe, about half month's pay.
Yeah.
One of the things that I didn't find out at my captain's mast was that the disciplinary infraction, in fact, caused me to lose my page 13 as a submarine volunteer.
Yeah.
So I got sent TAD over to a naval support unit at Saratoga Springs, which is right down the street from Nuke Prototype, and worked there for the first lieutenant for a couple of months. While I was there working for the first lieutenant, the SEL at the naval support unit was an AOC. He was a great guy. If I could tell you his name, I would, but it was almost 11 years ago now.
Yeah.
And he kind of sat me down right when I got there, and he was like, "Look, for all intents and purposes, you screwed up, but it didn't happen here. So what happens from here on out is up to you." So I worked pretty tirelessly. I was, working all around the base, cutting grass, fixing barriers, fixing diesel generators, doing all kinds of mechanic stuff because I didn't have anything else to do. about 4 or 5 months later, back when orders actually came out on message traffic, orders came in, said that I had been approved to convert to machinist mate auxiliaries. So I called the submarine auxiliaryman detailer and said, hey, I just got cleared. Fireman looking to go to a fast attack submarine. And he said, hey, you're not showing up in my system. You're coming up. You're not yet released. So call me back on Monday. Well, Monday, message traffic shows, oh, shit, we meant engineman. So at this point, I go, well, what the hell is an engineman? What do I do? Yeah. So I called the engineman detailer, and he was like, hey, look, you were a submarine volunteer, so I'm going to do what I can to stick you on a small boy. And I got selected for orders to CG-72 USS Vela Gulf. I went through the Cargo Weapons Elevator Sea School in Great Lakes en route and arrived there. So I was there 5 years. It was in dry dock when I got there. It was in dry dock when I left. I did 3 deployments on board, qualified in just about everything that I could. Volunteered for a back-to-back sea duty. Some personal reasons. My dad had gotten sick and it was closer to home.
Yeah.
So 5 years on there, leave as a first class, go to a new ship, show up to the USS Mahan DDG-72 as an EN1, take over A-Gang as the LPO. I've been on board for maybe 6 months or so, qualified EOW, stand-in EDO, basically senior in rate to the extent that I possibly could be. Come September, or come August 2nd of 2016, the Chiefs Board results came out and my name was on it. So I went through initiation, induction, whatever your term of choice is, on board the Mahan. And immediately the day I was pinned, we had a gap in main propulsion division. There was no chief. So despite not being a gas turbine systems mechanic, they were like, well, you're an engineman and a chief. And
close enough.
That's what's going to work for us right now. So we went through a TICOM mid-cycle in-serve and then immediately deployed. So stayed on board Mahan for a majority of the deployment. I flew off the day we outchopped 6th Fleet, so maybe 6-7 months into deployment. And detailer had given me orders up to Great Lakes. I volunteered for a 3rd Sea Tour and got told no. So my option was you can wear a red rope or you can be an instructor. And I was like, well, I'm really good at the technical side of this, but like I don't have the shiniest boots. I am not the person that you want talking to junior sailors to impact their opinion of the Navy for the next 20 years. So I'll go be an instructor. Got out to what used to be Surface Warfare Officer School Command, Unit Great Lakes, now Surface Warfare Engineering Schools Command. Mm-hmm. And I hit the ground running. I ran the Engineman Sea School for about 2 years, and then I moved over and brought up a new machinist mate sea school, ironically, for A-gangers. While I was there, I had the luck to work for 3 separate 6130 commanders as my commanding officer, 2 of whom are now 2 of the active duty 6130 captains. I did a flyaway with my CO during 2018. We went out for a board of visitors flyaway to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, talking to Ship's Force and the RMC instructors on what we can do as a training command to better support the needs of the fleet. Mm. And while my CO and I were on this trip, he's like, hey, look, I've spent some time sitting down and talking to you, and you understand the technical stuff. You're willing to look in the books. You try to do everything by the book. I think you'd be a really good fit to put in a package. And at the time, I could not say no fast enough.
Why?
So I have been for all intents and purposes, I have been a strong MP sailor my entire career.
Yeah.
I have been the guy who read the book, knew what was in the book, knew how to fix it, and couldn't keep his damn mouth shut.
Yeah.
So like a lot of sailors, I got myself into plenty of trouble, caught some lumps between the beginning and the end, but nothing that rose to the level of the original captain's mast.
Yeah.
But so I commissioned out in Great Lakes and did a Corona. I was out there for an extra month. I actually did not go through the LDO Chief Warrant Officer Academy or Fork and Knife School, whichever your term of choice is.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that was optional.
No, they canceled the class. It actually came from the LDO, Officer Community Manager, that because they're booked so far out in advance, they don't necessarily have the option to retread students back through.
Yeah.
So there were 2 classes that completely were waived.
Wow.
So I went through the prospective engineering officer pipeline for steamships up in Newport for about 2 months, and then got to where I am now on board USS Baton.
Oh, nice. I have to see if you know a chief when we're done. I'll keep his name on it for now, but
yeah, sure.
So yeah, man. So like, and the reason we kind of connected was you sent me an email about like when you first started listening, the Band-Aids on Bullet Holes episode, which was kind of about accountability being accountability and not like we're just going to kick you while you're down type of thing. And I've talked about that on a bunch of other episodes too. I'm sure I repeat myself a lot sometimes, but like, I'm curious for the NJP process, because you have like like, it's interesting enough when I hear chiefs go from chief to LDO, and we'll talk about that too. But for you to go from being a nuke, and you were basically, you were almost done with the pipeline, and then to, you had your disciplinary issue, and then they ended up punting you to a totally different career field and not even submarines. And it was basically like, you stayed in engineering. That's about it. Like everything else was kind of the opposite of what you expected. But I'm curious, like because we connected on that topic in particular, can you go into kind of detail about like how your NJP process happened and like how you viewed the process because of that experience going forward? And then we can even talk about the one where you told me you talked to your CO right before you commissioned about how you didn't think it went quite the way it should have.
Yeah, absolutely. So my NJP personally, at the time I was 21 years old. I thought I knew everything. I thought I could get away with anything. And if I did something wrong, I didn't necessarily think that it was a big deal. I just kind of chalked it up as the price of doing business. And at my captain's mast, the CO sat me down and said, hey, if what we were doing was training people how to fight fires, and you had blazed off a PQS, a qual card on how to fight fires.
Yeah.
10 years later, that sailor's going and fighting fires and somebody gets hurt. Is it your fault? And that was when it stuck in my chest like a knife.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I did not even consider that as being within the scope of what was happening. Like that was the distinct moment when it went from this happened to me to I caused this and now it's on me to turn this around.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder, because I've seen a lot of like basically on Reddit, like, or just social media sites where like people get like they joke, and rightfully so. It's a thing that you could poke fun at, but like the concept of like chiefs explaining like your room's dirty, and so like if you don't take care of your room, you're not going to take care of the ship. The equipment's going to break, and the ship's going to explode, and everybody's going to die. Is that what you want? Like, so it's almost like the theory of like something small being like blown out way. Like I could 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon my way into connecting something to make it look like it's the most terrible thing in the world. But like, I feel like in this case, it's a pretty accurate description, and it can be a useful tool. But like sometimes I feel also like there are times where it's like a thing is just a thing. You know what I mean? Like it's an innocent infraction is just an innocent infraction, and it's not that big of a deal. But in this case, do you feel like, I mean, obviously because of the impact it had, but do you feel like that is a kind of like a good method for making that connection?
Well, for me, absolutely it was, but that was because, that tied what I had done to accountability internally.
Yeah.
That was when I realized like, oh, this isn't happening to me. This is happening because of me.
Like I'm not a victim kind of
exactly.
thing.
And
Gotcha.
So I took that from there, and that was like, I had, 3.5 years remaining on my original contract. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to turn this around and I'm going to be able to hold my head high at the end of 6 years, I need to get my shit together.
Yeah. And do you feel like the process itself, like, so, because when I talk about the accountability process and the problems that I have with it, it generally stems from what happens after, or even during like the preliminary inquiry and then after, where it's like, it's almost like people aren't content to just hold a guy accountable to the standards or the policies or whatever that they're in conflict with. It's like we got to punish them by ostracizing them from the group and kicking them while they're down and taking everything we possibly can from them on the way out the door.
Yeah,
and basically just treating a human being poorly. Yeah, well, so but the process that you went through, was it like that?
So to me, it wasn't, but
okay,
I can't say for certain because that day I received T80 orders to another command. So it wasn't,
so they just,
I was no longer around any of the staff that had known me,
right.
Any of the other students that I was like friends with or close with. I got the punt immediately and I was gone.
Yeah. So it took the opportunity away for it to even happen, really.
I think, though, that with that SEL and what he had told me the day I got over to the Naval Support Unit, that really hit me. So
yeah,
when I got to my first ship, Command Master Chief sat me down and was like, hey, I looked at your record and that's cool. And I don't give a shit because it didn't happen here.
Yeah.
And that at that point I was like, okay, well, I've heard this twice now. Like maybe they really mean this. And maybe this is like legitimate blank slate.
Yeah.
And I get to write it from here. So, I mean, I used to onboard all the ships that I've served on, anybody, especially within engineering, but really any of the young guys that go to mast, the young sailors, I'll sit down with them and talk to them afterwards, whether they know me or not, give them a little bit about my background just to show them, you know, being held accountable is not necessarily the end of the world or the end of your career.
Yeah. That's cool, man. Because I think a lot, especially when it happens early on, but then even when it happens kind of like you'll see like a young first class trending towards chief and then they take a hit and it's just like, it feels like the end of the world because it's like, how do you recover from that? You know, and it's going to take 5 years and blah, blah, blah. And everything just exploded. So I think that's an important step for sure, is like I talk a lot about a bunch of different times, but really just like, especially the sailors that like it just happened to, or I got a couple like second chance sailors to my boat and it's just like, you got a clean slate with me. So start from scratch and no one's going to treat you like any differently than they treat anyone else unless you give them a reason to, you know, like, so.
And I mean, realistically, as a junior sailor, that's the best gift that you can ask for is, hey, it happened and it's over. How do we move forward?
And that's what's funny too, though, man, is because it's like, it's almost like it's not a gift. You know what I mean? And like, and I feel like it can be treated like it's like something that I possess the ability to like give them, but then like from the way, and maybe like this is probably the hugger in me, but like to me that's like an entitlement, is like I'm your leader, you're here, you're on a contract, like as long as you're a sailor in the Navy, it's my job to lead you. So if you show up to my unit, I don't give a damn what happened before you got here. I don't care what happened before I got here. If it happened at this command, like I don't care. Like it's different now, and it's not because I'm special. It's because that's just like, I feel like that's a fair assessment, is like when you go into that process, accountability happens, you walk out, you paid your penance, like moving on. Like we're starting from like, this is day one of the rest of your naval career. Like the accountability for whatever happened before happened. And I don't think it needs to continue, which a lot of times I see that it does. And they're like, cause like you'll be at a ranking board 8 months later and they're like, oh yeah, but he got a DUI. So,
I've had those fights too.
Care.
It's
like,
you know, after the accountability piece is ended, it seems like there's always somebody who isn't willing to let it go.
Yeah. Like they just have a scarlet letter for the rest of their time at that command. And it's just like I got a buddy that, he's a CS chief on submarines. Well, he was a CS chief on submarines. So he was my LPO on, not my last submarine, but the one before that, when I made chief and stayed. And, he was a second class then. And I mean, a lot of work and maturing. And I I brought him part of the way along, and then my buddy that relieved me kind of got him the rest of the way, and he started to flourish, made first class, went to an instructor job, and then he made chief, came back to a boat out in the area that I'm at now, and came and saw me on my last submarine and wearing anchors, and it was a really cool moment. And then I saw him again a couple months later wearing a first class crow, and I'm like, no, like what happened? And it was like an ARI, and this kid, so he's on submarines, the division's small, right? So a lot of submarines have a first class leading CS, which is the chief job, basically. Yeah. So he was the chief. He was on that submarine. He was a chief in the mess, and he was the leading CS. He got demoted because of this ARI because he was frocked. And like they gave him the option, do you want to stay or go? And he said, I'm not leaving my guys. Like, and he stayed on that submarine. So now he's a first class again, leading CS, has to interact with these chiefs that he was in the mess with, has to, like it was really crazy. But at the same time, like every time I talk to him, he's got a real positive outlook on it. But I'm scared for his career progression going forward, because if he ever wants to progress, it's like, you're going to be on this boat for the next couple of years at least. And there's probably guys like that in that mess. I hope there's not. I hope I'm completely wrong and they're embracing it with open arms.
I'd like to hope that there isn't, but what I've seen in my experience is that there is.
Same.
That being said, I mean, it takes a lot of heart to get punched in the face like that and to walk back in front of the same guys that worked for you the day before and to keep doing your job, to keep leading. And that's what inspires those guys.
Yeah, and imagine the life lessons there too, man. Not just for him, but for like all of his guys and even those chiefs. Like, Jesus, that takes some stones. Like, I couldn't believe
that is definitely commendable.
If he would have asked me, I would have tried to talk him into leaving. Like, because I just you need a fresh start somewhere else, man. But
when I was out in Great Lakes, we had a guy with a similar story. He had picked up chief and then gotten wrapped up in something. I don't know the exact story, but it was something involving 3M and gotten busted down. And for 5 years, this guy put his nose as close to the grindstone as it could get. Yeah. And 5 years later, made ENC again.
Nice. Yeah, and that's this kid, I feel like, will do that. Because I told him, I'm like, oh, you need to be the king of overcompensation. Like, everything you can do that is like so far in the opposite direction, like qualify everything. Like,
well, and that's, I mean, to be honest,
duties in the vein of
having that guy in the Chiefs mess was like a golden asset, because everybody knew his story, because he wasn't shy about sharing it, and everybody understood, like, this is why I need to value this.
And that's how I feel about, like, every time I talk to Jeff Bayless, man. Like, do you know his story? Have you listened to like his speech and stuff?
I have. It's very interesting.
Dude, like, and the fact that he was willing to like talk about it, I couldn't believe it. And so like he reached out to me and we got him on the podcast too. So there is a podcast. I forget what episode number it is, but
I believe I've listened to it.
Yeah, it's called The Evolution. I know that, but it's, man, like the fact that he's openly willing, because I feel like a lot of just human beings being prideful creatures would like probably not openly talk about that and just ride out their time as a chief.
Yeah, and just retire. Ignore that it happened. Yeah, get out of Dodge as quickly as possible.
This dude is like running into it, embracing it, and using it as like a teaching tool for whoever is willing to listen. And it's that is like a leadership development goldmine as far as like that experience and his willingness to talk about it. Because it's like I feel like that you get a lot more out of it when you're talking to junior sailors and you have the type of credibility. Because like I've never been to mass. I never even went to DRB. Like I just haven't. I probably should have a bunch of times. Like
mine should not have been the only one by any stretch of the imagination.
Not probably. I definitely should have went to mass at least twice. But most of it was my mouth and being insubordinate. It was shocking, I know. But I don't have that wrinkle, you know what I mean? Like when I'm talking to junior sailors, if they ask me, it's like, no, man, I've only been on the chief end of it. So it's kind of hard to relate to a person when you've never experienced it. And it's like, I'm not like upset that I didn't, but you just don't make the same connection on that topic in particular.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Than somebody who's gone through it. And so it's just like a really valuable thing. And that's one of the reasons why I want to talk to you, because how crazily you got thrown off like into a different direction, and then you picked another direction. And it's like, because I don't think on top of the stuff that we're talking about with like how like accountability happens, and it can be a rough process as far as like the way that commands decide to treat it and kick a guy while he's down type of thing. It's like, also, I feel like people think it's the end of the world a lot of times when, like I talked to my buddy Jason about on Thoroughly Run Through about when he had mental health struggles and like ended up not being able to hold a security clearance because of a lot of stuff that was going on. So they cross-rated him. Like, I think he cross-rated 2 different times. But it's like he cross-rated as a first class to BM, and then he ended up putting on an anchor. There's a path for you, is what I'm getting at.
No,
like,
absolutely. And that's, I mean, realistically, like it's cliched and it's trite, but it's not how far you fall, it's how you land.
Yeah,
how
man.
It's how
you move forward. And true. It's like you're when you show the desire to move forward too, it's like, people like you, people like me, people like Jason are going to see that desire, like that SEL that you had. It's like, they're going to see your desire to move forward and that you learned your lesson, and they're going to go to bat to put you in a position to succeed. And it's probably not, he can't get you back into the nuke pipeline, but I can put you in a position inside the Navy to succeed if that's what you want. And it's like,
absolutely,
there's a lot of weird paths out there that people don't really consider, man. And it's like, I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, it took a lot for me to admit to myself that the LDO program was what was best for me. So I had talked to that captain of mine and more or less shut the door. Told him, I really appreciate the interest. I really appreciate the vote of confidence, but I really don't think that somebody with my personality is necessarily the best fit to go into a wardroom. And, couple of days later, 2 of the other instructors, two chiefs, had sat me down. They were like, look, if you don't do this, you're stupid. Like, this is your opportunity to change the things that you have wanted to change in a much bigger way. And you're not doing it because you're too proud to admit it. And I mean, I went home, I talked to my wife that night, and I was like, look, this is what this entails. And she backed me 100%. Went in the next day, walked into the CO's office, told him, all right, what do I need to do?
Yeah. So what, cause we talked a little bit, cause you told me like that you went from chief to, LDO, and they're like, yeah, I know. And it's like, so talk to me about the transition process. Cause I feel like a lot of chiefs shy away from, warrant and LDO for that exact reason that you kind of alluded to, was like, we get a lot of times you either get good natured ribbing about like you're leaving the mess and you're abandoning your anchors and stuff, all the way up to like vitriol, like quitter, anchor chucker, blah, blah, blah. Like,
yeah. So probably about 90% of what I got was good natured ball busting. And it was from guys that I would have made fun of myself too, or been picking on them anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
There was a little bit of outright hate. But honestly, it came from guys that were relatively new in the mess.
Yeah.
Talking like under a year, and we're still so wrapped up in the glory of being a new chief.
Yeah.
That they didn't understand why somebody would want to leave it.
Right.
And I mean, truth be told, I get it. I understand it, right? The Navy needs Master Chiefs. The Navy also needs LDOs. The Navy also needs warrants. And if you were to dump all potential that we have in the senior enlisted ranks into any one of those funnels, it would only serve to harm us as an organization.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that like I don't have a problem with it ever, and I to the extent that I was always the guy going like, hey, why don't we invite like the warrants and like the LDOs that were chiefs like to chief season stuff, like to final night and everything else. And some, like, occasionally I'd catch somebody that was cool with it, but most of the time they're like, nah, they're not Chiefs. And I'm like, yeah, they are. Like, because what was the difference when I had a master gunnery sergeant that was a buddy of mine that went through the season in Iraq as a gunny, and everybody was fine with him being there. I'm like, so it's just because he's enlisted? Like, he's not even in the Navy. Like,
yeah, I mean,
but he's been an accepted chief longer than all you clowns. So it's like, why can't
the once a chief, always a chief maxim? It's a lot of people take it to heart, and a lot of people it's a punchline. And there's not necessarily rhyme or reason to how people take it. But I'll be honest, a lot of the guys who busted my chops the hardest were the guys that were like, 5 years ago I dropped 2 packages and didn't get selected.
Yeah.
Like, well, I mean, I'm sorry for you, bud. Like, I genuinely am, but let it go.
Yeah, dude. Because I had a and he did it anyway. He kind of braved the I don't know, the pushback, but like we had a LDO. So like on ballistic missile submarines, you have a LDO that's called the assistant weapons officer.
Okay.
And so he was a lieutenant the whole time he was there with me, but he was a senior chief when he got commissioned. So like he'd stop by and he'd knock and stuff because he understood like I'm an officer now. So like he'd knock and then he'd just kind of stop by and shoot a little bit. Like, and I was always like, dude, why do you even knock? Like, but I kind of got it because he's like, well, because, I'm an officer. You guys might be doing chief stuff. I don't want to like intrude and act like I own the place. But he's like, I guess I don't need to, but it's like, it just depends. And it's like this weird gray area. And I'm like, yeah, but why is it a gray area? Like, why I don't know.
I understand it.
I think it's stupid. I think it's like, I think you guys should still be able to sign charge books and do all the things and show up to final night and blah. Like, you went on an alternate career path, but like you're an accepted chief that has experience to add to the process, that has wisdom to share. Like, why would I not? If we're a product of our experience, like, why would I not draw on the resource I have in the LDO and warrant community that like they're also chiefs, you know what I mean? So it's like, especially during like the 6-week season and especially like final night, send them to get charge book. And I know a lot of guys just kind of do it anyway and get those charge book entries, which good on them.
I mean, I took a few kicks in the teeth for that when I was a selectee. And
and I'll
like everything else was like, I'm okay, but at the end of the day, that book says Zach Barvain. It doesn't say your name, so
yep.
That's what that opinion is worth exactly what it was when it came out of your mouth.
I would tell all the selects, man. I'm just like, whose book is it? Whose book is it? Whose shelf is it going to be on for the rest of their life? Not the guy telling you can't get an LDO or whatever in your book. So shit, whatever.
And that's the poor kid I had last year. I was a sponsor for a selectee who, as a first class, had an LDO package submitted. And,
that's always
part
fun.
of me thinks it was just a dig, but I mean, she ended up being great, and she understood everything about why I was, kind of struggling with it last year, because I knew it was my last go.
Yeah.
And, for better or worse, I made that choice, and I'll own that. So if that means I'm out of the process, then that was a choice that I made, and I'm willing to accept it. But I think it really depends on where you go and who's there.
But I don't think it should be, is my point. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think it should matter. I don't think it should depend. I don't think, because like, if you read the MCPON guidance for the season, it talks about drawing on the experience of like retirees and stuff. What's the difference? What's the difference?
I 100% agree with you.
Like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, it blows my mind. And it says, not like, now there's words in there about involving the wardroom, but it doesn't specifically, I wish it specifically addressed, and not just for the season stuff, but I wish it specifically addressed the inclusion of like warrants and LDOs in the training and the process, just because it's like, it's a huge resource that we're not, and I'm sure like I complain about, like I'm talking about all this stuff. I'm sure there are messes doing it, and I'm sure they're doing a great job of it. And they're drawing on that resource and leveraging it. And like, I usually, when I'm running the season, I go out of my way to involve those guys.
And that's, for better or worse, the way that the Navy works, you or I will only ever see a finite number of messes out of thousands.
Yeah.
So there could be somebody out there who's got it figured out, nailed down to a science, and runs it like clockwork every year. That just necessarily wasn't my experience.
I just wish it was standardized, man, to the extent possible, obviously. But trying to think, like, what's been the experience since, because I know you're relatively new to the officer community, but like, what's been your experience on the other side? You know what I mean? Like, you spent some time as a chief and now you're doing the wardroom thing. Like, how does the experience differ and how has the adjustment been?
So the adjustment hasn't been bad. But to be honest with you, I can't tell you what my experience is as compared to anybody else, because I commissioned in the middle of a pandemic. So everything was like, we're flying by the seat of our pants. We're just going to get it done. We're going to make it work.
Yeah.
And you know, we're sailing uncharted waters here. So, I mean, I did, I had a commissioning ceremony with 10 people, to include like my first salute, my wife and my son.
Yeah.
And it was, it was the best that we could make it given the constraints put upon us.
Right.
But then, like the PCS and everything was fine. When I got to the ship, I had been talking to some of the other LDOs on board. Thankfully, if you ever go to an LHD, like almost 80% of the officers in engineering department are all prior enlisted, either LDOs or warrants.
Okay.
So, there's like 6 of us in the department. So it's not like an immediate different world.
Yeah.
But I was talking to my chief about this the other day, actually, and the biggest change for me was that, so I've always been a guy that I read the pubs, I read the books, I try to get as knowledgeable as I can in what I do so that I can better set my guys up to do the job when I'm gone and they're still here. Yeah. And the biggest single difference is it's not like the day I commissioned, somebody dropped the GIFM and every NSTM into my brain and I could just spout it.
Right.
But the stuff that I had known for years, when I approach a senior, whether it's, a department head up to the CO, I'm saying the same thing I would have said 3 years ago, but it's perceived differently.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is probably the most single poignant part to me of the defining line between being a chief and being an LDO, is that I don't necessarily have to defend every word that I say because there isn't an inherent distrust. Now, I'm sure that there isn't an inherent distrust everywhere, but as a chief, one of the problems that I had was, I was punching above my weight class with primary assistants and department heads, and they were like, okay, well, I understand that you showed it to me in black and white, but I think that there's another book that says something different, so why don't you go look that up? Like, no, I brought you doctrine, and that's what we're going to do because that's what the book says. So I'm not going to dance around in circles to find more doctrine that contradicts it. I just need you to trust that I know how to do my job. And since commissioning, I have had to do so much less of that it has been wonderful.
It's the same putting a star over your anchor, man. Like I noticed the conversations went differently because I did a chief's tour as a chief that was one of the junior chiefs in the mess. And I had to qualify, and even to the other chiefs, I had to like qualify and explain and like argue and just everything. Every time I briefed anybody on anything, they were like, they were pushing back on purpose to make sure that because I was learning how to chief, man. I was like still figuring it out. I went back to see as a senior chief, and I'm like briefing the CO as a department chief, and he's just like, okay, roger that, senior, thanks. And like I'm like, huh? Like, you don't want to ask me 17 questions really quick? And he's like he just trusted me a lot more than the first go around. And so I noticed that, like, even I was in an SEL role at an A school as a chief, and then I made senior chief, and I got to see the difference, and it was just different. Like, it's just, you're having a different conversation. It
absolutely is. Even if you're saying the exact same thing, it's received differently on the other end.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go, like, I want to loop back around to so now you're I guess you were waiting to commission, so you're still a chief, and you had that conversation with your CO about the NJP. after listening to me blab on about what I thought. But like, what was the kind of the details you can share? Like, what was kind of the situation for that NJP, and then kind of the conversation that you had with that CO?
So without giving too much detail, relatively cut and dry, pretty stereotypical case. It wasn't alcohol related, but reduction in rate suspended. Mm-hmm. And all in all, on my end, it seemed like the mitigating circumstances were far in excess of the threshold at which we had to start asking questions. How could we have set the situation up better to have not impacted said sailor in that manner? And one of the things that, like, even before I got selected to commission, before I commissioned as a chief, like, I had a far better discourse with my commanding officers. Like, I was far more able to walk in and say, hey, sir, I understand that this is the way you want to go, but I just want to ask, like, have you considered these factors?
Yeah.
And it got listened to a lot more as a chief. And that was fantastic, because I've never been a guy who was able to swallow opinions. Like, if I thought something was wrong, it was coming out one way or the other.
Yeah.
And sometimes that definitely did not help my career.
So, like, how did I guess, like, when you had the conversation with him, how did it go as far as where you were? It sounded like you were vocalizing that you didn't really agree with how it went, right? Like, the proceeding itself, but then, like, kind of the follow on action, and then you guys actually had a conversation where he came out the other end kind of like, oh, okay, like, understanding a little bit better that maybe we could have done better by that sailor.
Yeah, no, I think that when you get to a certain level of experience, and I'm not necessarily sure where that is, but I think that once you've been doing this for so long, things become much simpler in your book, and you don't necessarily take into account everything else happening. Yeah. I think a lot of people, once they get to a certain level, and again, I can't tell you what that level is, I haven't arrived there yet, but you kind of get to a point where you feel like, okay, this happened, this is what I'm going to do, period, the end.
And
in the process, there's kind of a whole lot of checks and balances to make sure that at least things are discussed, but I don't know that they always get given due consideration.
Yeah. I think I've definitely seen that with a lot of COs. Maybe not so much. I don't know. I had one prior enlisted CO that he was almost like a kind of guy I had to talk into being harsher. Like, there were times where it was like, no, really, you need to punish this kid. But yeah, I think most of the, nuclear trained 1120s that I've worked with on submarines, it's generally like a lot of my COs, like, I could see the weight of the decision making, like the weight of the fact that I have to impose punishment on this kid, and I know that I'm gonna, like, take money or rank or whatever. So, like, they didn't take it lightly, but I feel like there was a lot of nuanced discussion that could and should happen about how the kid gets treated going forward, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I mean, going back to what we were talking about earlier, where, once accountability takes place, it needs to be over. And then on us as leaders, it becomes our job to then assist that sailor in finding their way back to whatever their straight and narrow is.
Right. And that's what, like, I would struggle to have, like, I felt like I was the only guy in the room that felt that way about it, because that was how it went. It was like everybody wanted to ostracize a sailor after they, and it was always something like, especially if it was a drug offense, right, where a kid's going to get processed out no matter what.
Yeah, it's like there's not a lot of gray area there.
Yeah, but you can't, like, you can't do anything else to this kid. Like, he's already getting thrown out of the Navy, and there's from what I understand, the sub-pers man has a statement where it's like, if they pop positive and are processed out for a drug related offense, their dolphins get removed on their way out the door. So it's like, they're going to get punched in the stomach 20 times on their way out the door.
It's just an unnecessary kick in the balls. Like, you're already getting rid of the guy.
I agree.
Let him keep what he's earned.
I agree,
because I feel like the Navy slogan.
Well, I agree, because it's like you just in the same way that we're talking about, like, looking forward from the end of the accountability process formally to like this sailor recovering. Like, it's almost like we're going back in time and erasing everything they've ever done. It's like that just because the sailor made a mistake and has to be held accountable because of the way the policies are written, it doesn't mean they didn't valuably contribute to our nation's defense and earn those dolphins that they're wearing. So it's
if you look at
what are we doing?
If you look at what the accountability process looks like, say at the flag level, right? Mm-hmm. Say misconduct occurs and then there's an investigation, and then following disciplinary proceedings, there's a secondary investigation to determine the pay grade in which last they served honorably. So you'll see a lot of times when you have, an admiral of some star get hemmed up on something disciplinary, they're still going to be allowed to retire, but it might not necessarily be in the grade that they expected.
Right.
And it's not necessarily a process that we could use on the enlisted side, just because you're talking about different time in grade, time in service, different requirements. But all in all, I think that process kind of reflects more on, okay, well, this is the good that the guy did, and this is when he stopped.
Yeah, and I think they do, when you're talking about like a retirement eligible sailor, I think they do that. I'm remembering some Master at Arms dog handler senior chief thing. Guy got in trouble doing something overseas, and they ended up doing that. Like, they went back through his record and back through the process and figured out, like, okay, what's the last time he performed honorably? Is he still eligible for retirement? I want to say that that's what happened. I'd have to look it up. It's been so long since I've looked into that story. But yeah, I just feel like, even if you're not talking about a retirement eligible sailor, like, I tell the story about a young sailor that like popped positive for cocaine, and up to that point had been great, and he had his dolphins and everything else, and it was like the chain of command, but especially the CO, was just like, I want his dolphins, I want him out of here, I don't even want to see him in this office, blah blah blah. Like, he violated the like integrity of his blah blah, like, just freaking out, like acting like he like punched his mom or something. And I'm like, look, I was the preliminary inquiry guy, and like, he did it. Like, I made a recommendation that, like, it's more likely than not that he did it, but the circumstances were super like murky. He made some bad choices. He went home on leave. He was like pre-gaming with his friends, drinking, and they ended up at a strip club, and he had drank way too much trying to keep up with his friends. So by the time he gets here, he's like super drunk, to the point where he was like blacking out periodically. Like, he was losing time. And he's like, I remember there was people next to us in a table. They had drugs and stuff. They offered cocaine multiple times, and I remember saying no multiple times. And then I lost some time, and I woke up in my bed the next day hungover. And apparently at some point I said yes, or somebody slipped it to me or something. I don't know. And it's like he made some bad decisions. Like, he did it. Accountability's got to happen. But like, they wanted to burn this kid alive. And I'm just like, why are we treating this kid this way? Like, yes, like, all the things are going to happen. There's likely no way that he could appeal this and actually win and whatever. Like, he's going to process out for a drug offense. He's going to lose a bunch of benefits. Like, all these things are going to happen.
Yeah, it's but like, at the end of the day, you also don't have to continue,
right?
Dumping on the kid. Like, it's bad enough as it is. There are things that are mandatory that are going to happen. We don't necessarily need to add to that and make it worse.
Yeah, and like, even throughout the process, like when I was interacting with this kid for the preliminary inquiry, it was like, I treated him like a normal dude. Like, you're just a person, man. You're a human being. I'm going to treat you like that. We're going to have a conversation like that. I kept asking him, like, do you have any questions about anything? Okay, if you do, come get me, blah, blah, blah. And like, once he was done, and they do this thing where they temporarily assign him to like a transient division while he processes out. And I saw him at the galley one day. I went up there to visit a sailor that like wanted to sit down and talk about mentorship stuff. And it was one of my old A school students. And so I went up there and I ran into him in the chow line and I was like, hey man, what's going on? Like, how you doing? Like, just talk to him about like what he's doing in the transient division. And I was like, look, man, I don't know what everybody else told you, but like, if you need anything, you can come by the office and find me and we'll talk about it. And I was like, I don't give a, I don't care what anybody else said or how anybody else feels about it. If you come into that office and somebody says like, what are you doing here? Get out. I was like, you come find me and, and we'll talk about it. And then they got to go through me, and they're not going to go through me. Cause that's just, I'm this, like you're not going to win that argument. So I'll take him somewhere else if you don't want him in your office, sir. But like, we're still going to talk. And I'm still going to help this kid because he's a sailor until he's not. Like and even then he was a sailor, and I'm still going to help him. So
exactly. Know, and I think really like we just need, we need more people to open their eyes to that, because it's so easy in the Navy to play out of sight, out of mind. Once somebody's transferred, once somebody's detached, once somebody's separated or retired, it's so easy to just write it off and immerse yourself in the detail of what's going on right now in front of me. Yeah. And I think that in that we lose a lot. We lose a lot of good people because they don't necessarily feel like there's anybody who cares longer than you're doing productive work for me.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it's like Fairweather leadership, man. It's like, I had a kid, when I showed up to the A school, I was checking in. And I walked into the instructor office, and there's this kid sitting in it was like one of the random cubicles off to the side that clearly wasn't actually occupied by anybody. And he was like sitting there, like doing the head nod, like fighting and falling asleep. I'm like, who is that? And I'm like, oh, that's this guy, like, I'm like, okay, what's he doing? Oh, he just marches his students to and from chow. I'm like, okay, like, what else does he do? Like, what, is that it? Like, is that all he does? Like, yeah, he's not allowed to interact with the students, like, as an instructor. I'm like, why? Oh, because Chief so-and-so said he can't. And then, like, that chief wasn't even there anymore. I'm like,
oh, God.
Okay, like, what? But why? Like, I just wouldn't let it go. And so, like, 3 weeks, I was checking in and getting I had to qualify as an instructor and all this other stuff. And then they quickly realized that I asked too many questions and I was annoying and I wanted to fix everything that was broken. So they're like, well, we can't have this in the schoolhouse. So they punted me over to the barracks to run the NMTIs. And on my way out the door, I'm like, hey, you get up. You're coming with me. Like, and I just turned around. I'm like, I'm taking him with me. I don't care how anybody feels about it. And like, we walked out and I took him over to the barracks, and they couldn't produce anything formal saying that this kid couldn't be an instructor. So
and there is within the NETSI domain, there is a process for removing somebody from instructor duty.
Right.
But you ever seen the movie A Few Good Men?
Yeah.
Right. The whole Code Red deal. Like we come up with these creative and unauthorized ways to punish people. And then we get surprised when it blows up in our face, when really there's a perfectly functional disciplinary system that we have, but we just don't use it.
Yeah, this wasn't even that, though. Like, this kid, they just didn't like him. Like, so, like, basically what happened was he got sent there to fill a billet. That he was an LS. He got sent to fill a billet to teach an LS class. And the detaching command didn't properly screen him for instructor duty. So, like, he didn't have a bunch of the stuff that he needed. Like, he didn't go to instructor school en route. He didn't have a driver's license, like, just dumb stuff like that. And so I'm like, okay, what have you guys been doing about it for the last 6 months? Like, have you tried to get him a driver's license?
Easy fix. Like, hey, I'll take you to the DMV, buddy.
Dude, like, yeah. We started doing all that, but it was like, by the time I got there, it was almost too late because he was going to hire tenure out as a second class. And so it was like, we had to, like, I did all the things, and man, we got him to a place where he was functional and he was doing really well and he was passionately taking care of the students. The students worshiped this kid after we started treating him like a human being and letting him valuably contribute. And then we let him qualify NMTI. And when he got to do that and he got to put the rope on and stuff, man, he lit up. And it was just like, the students like worshipped this kid. They freaking loved him. Every course critique I got was LS2's the best. LS2's the best. He's always helping us out. He's always staying late and, like helping us get ready for uniform inspections and teaching us things. And broke my heart because he ended up higher tenuring out because there was nothing I could do, man. I couldn't teach him how to LS. Like he had to pass an exam, but and it's like if what made me really mad is if I had more time with him, I may have been able to get him like an LS mentor and get him to where he needed to be to take the test and do better. Because he did better on the exam. We almost got him to his driver's license. Like he was progressing a lot, but it was like
too little, too late.
I got there too late. It fucking killed me, dude. Like, and I get it. Yeah.
My wife has noticed that there is a distinct difference in me when I come home after taking a sailor to, DRB, XOI, captain's mast, anything like that. Like even if it's something that's cut and dry, straight up willful misconduct, like I come home and I'm not like, I need a little bit of time to just burn it down because it sucks. It's not fun. Man. And it doesn't mean that it's not worthwhile and it shouldn't happen, but there should be some sort of like moral guilt on my part.
Oh yeah, dude.
If somebody under my charge screws up, like whether my name goes down on paper or not, at some point I have to own that and I have to look and say, hey, well, what could I have done differently here so have to not set this kid up to fail in such a spectacular manner? That's
kind of the way that I look at it is like I own it like it's my failure because I'm his leader and I should have, his or her, and I got to guide them down the right path, blah, blah, blah. And it's like there is obviously a personal accountability piece where it's like I can't make decisions for a person. I can't hold their hand and spoon feed them their entire life. I can try, and I have, but like
you can't be there 24 hours a day.
Yeah, either. I can't be ever present. So it's like I had a kid that the same thing, like just, and I mean, he should have never shown up like to the job that he was at. And like, by the time I got to him, it was like, he'd been sitting there festering with all these financial problems and all this other stuff that like he had a couple of ARIs and like, it was just like so much stuff that didn't happen that could have happened where this kid could have gotten more help. And I maybe like if somebody had intervened way sooner and made this kid feel valued, he wouldn't have made the choices that he made. Like that's all I can get to in my head in the flow chart of like, what could I have done differently? But it's like, it wasn't even me. It was like whoever was here 6 months ago, kind of the same situation as that other kid. And it was like, but in this case, like he needed help and everybody knew it and no one did anything. And I was just like, I was furious. And he was a kid that I ended up losing him. And it was like, I kind of knew, like, it was like I had a conversation with my CMC and he goes, this is probably not going to go the way that you think it's going to go. Right. Like I understand, like, cause my CMC's a lot, like we're very similar in our, like, we want to just sell out on saving everybody and like just doing everything we can to like have everybody succeed. And it's like, even when it looks like it's a lost cause to everyone else, I'm like, nah, give him to me, give her to me. Like, I'll fix that. Let them come exist in my organization and like, we'll get the sailor the help they need or the environment they need or the training they need or whatever. And we'll fix it. Like I very much honestly, the same
a lot
way.
Like, especially the more junior, the more malleable. So
for sure,
if you can show a junior sailor that you genuinely care about them as a person, as a sailor, their personal and professional development, they'll go to the ends of the world for you. But the flip side of that is if you stick them in a corner and take them out once a week when something needs to be done, then there's no value to be felt there. There's no intrinsic motivation to accomplish anything because at the end of the day, you only need X from them.
Yeah. And that's what I think that this kid, he had done an entire first tour on a submarine. So he's at like 5 years. So I honestly think that his experience in the Navy had already kind of like downloaded into him that no one valued him. And like I like his background had something to do with it and just like the way he grew up and all this other stuff. But like, yeah, man, when it all wrapped up, like I thought we were making a lot of progress, even though it was like painfully slow and like a ton of work. Like my it was financial issues primarily. So like God bless my command financial specialist, like just another chief. And she wanted to blow her brains out, but it's like, cause it was like, he was embarrassed about like the situation that he was in and that he needed this help. And so it was like, she would like peel back, and just find more stuff that he didn't tell her about and all this other stuff. And it was just like, she was, I'm trying to help you. I need you to tell me everything, blah, blah, blah. And so she was getting really frustrated. And then it ended up with, I got a phone call that he didn't show up for watch, and found him at his apartment. And he so I went to his apartment, and as I was pulling up, I got a call that he showed up to the building drunk. And I'm just like, God damn it. And so it's just, man, it's then like, the whole rest of the day unfolds, and it's like 1800 and I'm walking out of the building, and my CMC is walking to his truck, and he just sees me, and I'm like head hanging low. And we talked about it. He's like, remember that conversation we had? He's like, look, man, I'm not saying I wouldn't have done the same thing and sold out on trying, but like, you had to know that the odds were like very against you here. And I was just like, yeah, man, but I thought we were making progress. And I don't even think it, like, even if there was like a 0% chance, like I still would have sold out on trying and then been disappointed when I failed. Cause it's just like, I don't know, man. Like,
I mean, that's what we're
like
supposed to do. Like that's my job at the end of the day. Like,
it's what you were describing too, though, man. I have like an emotional attachment. Like I felt gutted when I failed, like, and I failed. That's what happened. Like, so that's how I felt about it. You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, that whole, like the emotional investment that we put into this career, into our sailors, it's some of the most ridiculous highs and some of the most awful lows. Yeah. I remember when I was a first class, I was filling a LCPO billet. We were gapped for about a year, and I was on leave for the funeral of a family member, and young Divo calls me and wants to tell me that he got his SWO pin, and I could have done a backflip. Like, I was like, I'm so unbelievably proud of you. Congratulations. Like,
yeah.
And that's, by any standard logic, you're not going to have a first class in the Navy in a position of mentorship to an ensign.
Yeah. I mean,
yes, it's out there, but by and large, like, that's not normally the expectation. But,
right. I mean, for sure.
This guy, I was just, I was thrilled. And then conversely, in the times that I've had to hold sailors accountable and it ended at captain's mast, whether it was deserved or not afterwards, like it
doesn't
hard.
matter. I just feel like I failed, and I feel like I'm sitting there like going, like, forensically accounting the entire like leadership interaction experience I had with the sailor. Like, what did I do? Like, what could I have done better?
What off ramp existed for me to do something different to impact this process?
How common do you think, in your experience with chiefs, officers, anybody in leadership, how common do you think that type of emotional investment is?
It's hard to say. So, I mean, there's guys out there that, even guys that I've never met personally, like Jay Bell. We'll use him as an example, right? So the other day,
I got to get him on this podcast soon.
The other day, I'm scrolling through Facebook, and he posts a picture, and it, like, I could have jumped up out of my damn chair. There's a kid with a restricted badge and a NAM on his chest.
I meant to bring that up earlier because we were talking about the accountability stuff.
I saw that picture and just like, man, I wish that I could start pumping Jay Bells off the damn assembly line.
Yeah.
And sending him to CMC bill. It's like, this is what we need.
For sure, dude. Like, I saw that, and I shared it on like I think it was just on Facebook, but it's like an illustration of exactly what we were just talking about. Like,
I mean, it's an illustration of the process going the way it's designed.
Exactly how it's supposed to. Yeah. Like, because you got to think that, like, maybe the kid was just a go-getter, and the thing happened, and he just owned it because, I don't know, that's how he was raised, and his parents, like, taught him to just pick yourself back up, dust yourself off, and move on with life. Like, maybe it wasn't, but my suspicion is that command and that mess and Jay Bell do a freaking ridiculous job of, like, prepping a sailor for what comes after captain's mast. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
Like, look, Like, this is going to happen. We still love you. Like, you're going to go in there. You're going to be honest. You're going to take what's awarded. And the second you walk out of there, your slate is clean. You're going to serve your time or whatever. But from the second you walk out of that room, you're a sailor on board my ship, and you're going to be treated just like everybody else. And you're going to be like, this is the first day of the rest of your naval career. You know what I mean? Like, that they shored that all up before that kid went in there.
And then
he came out, hit the deck plate running. And
that has to be a command-wide climate. There is no way that there is any like overwhelming voice of dissent to that.
Yeah, there can't be. How could you? Because, man, and I often wonder, because I'm like right there where I'm going to be finishing my cobb quals. And if I get medically cleared, that's, billet next is being on a submarine in the same position Jay Bell's in. And it's like, I gotta think that type of approach, it's going to be super contagious. And it's like people like so much buy-in is going to happen so quickly that it's like, you're not going to have to fight against the negativity stuff. They're going to love working there. They're going to love being a part of that experience. They're going to love watching a sailor rebound and put a NAM on after a captain's mast. They're going to love watching all of the things happen the way that they thought they should have when that chief or whoever was a blue shirt. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, I can't imagine you're going to have much, if any, dissent. You know what I mean?
The only wish I have is that we could take that and just
carbon copy
paste across the fleet.
Because I feel like I've long since held the belief, and I don't know if it's a good thing. That's kind of a caveat to it. But I've long since held the belief that the command SEL, whatever iteration it is at the unit level that you're at, they are going to drive the culture of the command more than anyone else. Like,
I absolutely believe that. So I had,
so it's like, I don't know, man. Like I don't know if that's a good thing because it's a single point of failure. You know what I mean?
It is
a lot of the times.
So I had a prior cobb as a command master chief on a DDG, and to this day, I don't understand the whole process of the conversion. I know it's the same C school, it's the same NEC.
It's not even, it's usually just
by and large
follow on.
I mean, he came, and I had been more acquainted with submariners than most surface sailors, just because I spent 2.5 years in that community at the beginning of my career.
Yeah,
and
so you had all like the sub instructors and stuff.
The level of intensity he brought specifically to sailors' level of knowledge. And that's, I mean, you can spin it any way you want, but at the end of the day, like, a submariner is going to be exceptionally proficient in their field. That's not always necessarily true on the surface. And it's not, it's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a fact. But he brought was, okay, well, he went through and got his surface warfare pin, and he did it the right way. This dude printed the 100 sections, printed the 200 sections, was in his office drawing system diagrams. And for me, like, I'm doing backflips. Like, I'm a junior chief, and like, this is what it's supposed to be. This is how this is supposed to work. You're doing it right, man. And it caught like wildfire.
Yeah.
It went throughout the command.
Yep. The example that sets that, like, cause I know, like, I've heard people joke about, like, submariners specifically, about how they went to like a submarine tender and like got a ESWAS pin with their check-in sheet. And it's like, it's the reason why it's treated that way is because people like this, like at the CMC level, are allowing it to be treated that way. And I've talked to a lot of surface sailors about it, and they're like, it depends on the command. Like, some commands take it really seriously and it's done really well, and others don't. And
which realistically, you would never hear that with somebody talking about their fish. Ever.
No, not at all. And that's what's there is sometimes some discussions that are had about, like, especially with like cooks and stuff, right? Where like there are sailors that just show up to the submarine and they struggle a lot with qualifications, and they don't all necessarily have the aptitude to do it on their own, which is kind of the culture of getting your submarine dolphins. Is like, you're kind of left out on a windy corner a lot, and they want to see you struggle and see how you react to that struggle and how you kind of treat like how you react to the adversity of it. And if you ask for help and stuff like that. But sometimes it turns into this like almost adversarial relationship where what it should be is like people like helping each other out and getting behind and pushing. Because if somebody ends up at a submarine qualification board and they can't pass it, it's the fault of their leadership. So it's like, hey, come on, like figure it out. And so there's discussion. I came out of a submarine qualification board for an electrician one time, and he was a kid that like people expected him to struggle. And this was actually, I believe, his second board. And I've never seen a kid want it more in my life. Like he was this really interesting kid that, you could tell he wasn't like, he didn't have great social skills. Like if that makes sense, like he struggled relating to the other guys in his division and just like in his peer group.
I mean, that's not an incredibly uncommon thing amongst the naval reactors community.
Yeah. But he had a really hard time with just like divisional quals, departmental quals, like, but he was all heart, man. Like this kid like would work for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if you'd let him. All he wanted to do was succeed. Just great attitude. Like he FSA'd for me a bunch of times because he kept having trouble and he wasn't qualified or anything. And I loved having him. He was amazing. He was one of the hardest workers I've ever had on the decks with me. But he came into his second submarine qualification board and he knocked it out of the park, man. And it was me, a JO and like a fully qualified JO. And then it was a nuke. I think it was a fully qualified ELT, like a lead ELT qualified nuke.
Okay.
And I mean, we put him through it, man, and asked him all the questions, and we put him through damage control stuff. Like he donned an FFE and SCBA for time and like made a 4MC report and did all this other stuff. And then like explained to us, did the drawings, did all the things. Like he had lookups at the end, but we had his division just expected him to fail. So when he came out, a bunch of the electricians started like basically saying that we like threw him an underhand pitch. And I went and found their LPO and I said, if one of your electricians wants to come talk to me about my ability to administer a submarine qualification board, stop by any time. I was like, I'll walk you through it step by step. But if like, you're not going to like challenge my integrity under your breath, you're going to do it to my face. So
yeah, no,
like,
absolutely.
I was
that's not something you sling lightly.
Yeah. But it was, it happens. Like it gets questioned occasionally. And like, there's some things but that's because of the integrity of the process and because of how fiercely protective we are of submarine dolphins. Like guys get upset if it's perceived to be like if the integrity of the process is perceived to be degraded at all. So like I wish it was like that in the surface community. And I know there's commands out there that are doing it like that, and that's awesome. But yeah, it goes a long way when a CMC who doesn't even need to, you know what I mean? Like he could have cream puffed his way through that ESWAS process, but he didn't, and he made sure everybody knew it, and that's outstanding. And that is exactly how that's supposed to be done.
He took it to the extent where he was going to individual work centers and seeking out, like the first super knowledgeable second classes, the first classes.
Give me a checkout, like, and like ask me all the questions and give me lookups. Like I want to know.
It caught like wildfire.
That's outstanding.
Throughout the command, you had people that were trying to challenge each other. Hey, I read something in this tech manual. Did you know this? And it was great.
Yep.
The end result is the command benefited as a whole because everybody's level of knowledge started trending up.
And that's exactly how that's supposed to happen, man. That's outstanding. God, I love that. That makes me happy on the inside. Any save rounds or alibis, man? Anything we didn't talk about that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
I mean, I don't think I have anything in particular. The big thing for me was like, I talked to guys on a 1s and 2 basis coming out of their captain's mast and like, look, here's what happened to me. Here's what I did. Here's how it impacted my career. And then I'm here. I've been in the Navy 13 years. Like I am not, 24 years in, senior as hell. Like it turned around inside of a year. It was 361 days from the day of my captain's mast to the day that I pinned on 3rd class off an advancement exam.
Nice.
So to the young guys, like if you get punched in the face, whether it's your fault or not, get up and keep moving forward.
Yeah,
Some
man.
days it'll be slow, some days it'll be fast, but by and large, like, progress is not going to happen if you don't make it happen. And if you give up on it, it's a losing battle.
Yeah, and the pain is temporary, man. Like I wish more Jay Bell's on my life's to-do list, so like I want to talk to a CMC at that level that created that type of a culture, because like I've only seen it a handful of times on submarines, and it's like it's really rare where you just kind of, it feels different. The energy in the air is different. You know what I mean? Like the attitude, everybody's attitude's different. Everybody, it's like they're happy to be there, and you're like, what? I'm underway on nuclear power. Why is anybody happy to be here? But you're like, holy crap, like it can be done, you know? And so it's like, I'm real interested to learn about that and try to like see how you create a command culture where that's the norm, because it's like, that should be everybody. And it's like, it scares me that the single point of failure feels like it's at like the command SEL level, because it's like, if you don't have a J Bell, like, then you're like, yeah, okay. So like, what if I feel like the command culture takes a hit when you don't have somebody that's that passionate and that engaged and that, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that, I mean, the CMC or Cobb can be a single point of failure, but really, I will believe until the day that I die that the command culture is driven out of the chief's mess. 100%.
Yeah.
And unless you've got a mess of one wearing two stars, I think that there's a lot of impact that can be had there.
Yeah, for sure. And I was going to caveat that when I said it earlier, was like, because I've had like Cobbs and CMCs that needed help, you know what I mean? And it was like, we had a strong chief's mess, and it was like, so that no one knew that, the senior chiefs were picking up the slack, you know? I mean, like, they kind of did, but it was more framed as we were getting trained to be Cobbs in the future type of thing. And that wasn't really, it was kind of what was happening, but sometimes not really. Yeah. Is like, we were just filling the gap. And, and I think that there's that can definitely happen, and there's a lot of value in that happening. So it's like, yeah, it's like kind of a single point, because like the other thing that I kind of go back to too, though, is I've seen, because if you have a junior chief's mess and the command SEL is setting a culture that, you know, might not be the best, it's like, a lot of times what you'll see is the chiefs just kind of say, okay, this is what we're doing, and they adapt to what's going on around them. And like, if you don't have stronger voices in there that are just saying, no, like, this is what we need to do. And it's tough when you're the only one, because I've been that guy too. When I had a struggling command SEL. It's not a fun
position to be in.
Yeah. I had a struggling command SEL and not the strongest quarters. And then it was just like, I was the only voice in there going, no, like, that's not what we should be doing. And I lost a lot until I got help, you know, and like, until more guys showed up that could kind of get on my side of the fence and help. Yeah. But so it definitely, I would say it's definitely the mess, but the culture of the mess is driven by that command SEL. So yeah, man. I'm excited. I got to get him on soon, because that'll be a fun conversation,
I'm sure.
But well, hey man, thanks for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it. I know that this was originally started for a much more junior audience, but I don't plan to stop listening anytime soon.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. All right, everybody. I hope you like that. I love talking to listeners. Number one, that's always fun. But this guy, Zach, had a really interesting career progression. He encountered the accountability process early on. It completely derailed his plans coming into the military, where he was almost done with the nuclear pipeline, and then goes through, recovers, kills it, makes chief, and then is selected to LDO. Those transitions are always interesting to talk about. And then, of course, the accountability thing is something that I love talking about, and that I'm glad we got to again. And I mean, I talked about it on the last one with Chief Nick about the Chiefs accountability, like that. I think that a guy should be able to, or a girl or whoever, should be able to lose a star or even lose their anchors over something disciplinary related, much like a first class can lose a chevron. So lots of awesome discussion. Really glad we got to have it, and I appreciate, as always, listeners interacting and a lot of times it leads to me dragging them out of the podcast. So that was awesome. If you need anything from us, hit us up. Don't give up the shit podcast at gmail.com. You can Facebook message us. Don't give up the shit podcast, or you can DM us on Instagram or Reddit, or engage us in the subs. DGUTS podcast, all those things on Reddit, and then at DGUTS podcast on Instagram. Hit us up. Let us know what you think. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or criticisms, always open to hearing them. And then if you would be so kind, like, share, subscribe, review on all the platforms. Just social media, if you share and engage in the content, it helps. If you review on all the podcast platforms, it helps, especially if those reviews are positive. If you enjoy it, it helps the algorithms get the message out to the people that need it. So it always helps, and we would appreciate it. And that's it. That's what I got for you today. Thank you so much for listening, and don't give up the ship.